end what we started with yesterday. All right. So here we go. So quick review. We talked about why interest groups are formed, how interest groups have grown. And what we're going to look at today then is how do they actually function? What is it that interest groups are doing? And the very first thing that you'll see is that interest groups utilize the mass media. And we all know what the mass media is, right? And for the longest time, understand that mass media really just meant sort of ABC, CBS, and NBC. Okay? For the longest time, that was all mass media was. Right? Now, starting in, what was it, like 91, maybe? Is that when CNN, I think that's when CNN started. Right? And so CNN is the cable news network. It's the first, like, 24-hour-a-day news network. There's now like a half dozen of them or so. Although CNN is now not all news. Right? They actually have regular programs on there. They're actually a little bit more like what the History Channel started to be. Now I can't figure out what they show on the History Channel. I don't know how Pawn Stars is history, but whatever. All right. So mass media now also encompasses, though, all of those things that you think of in terms of what you use on your daily life, right? So those of you that are sitting there playing on your phones right now, you might be looking up, right, what's going on Instagram or Twitter or whatever your little social media of choice is. What?
CNN was founded in 1980.
1980? I really thought there was a time in my childhood, well, probably because I grew up in West Virginia and we didn't have but like 6 channels, so sadly that's not a joke, right? I grew up, I was old enough and poor enough that when I was a kid we had to get up off the couch and go turn the little knob on the TV, okay? But mass media now would also encompass Facebook or Twitter or all of those things. Okay? Because one of the things that mass media can do is mass media can get you mobilized and organized, right? We've talked about this before when we've talked about things in terms of discrimination, right? We talked about that idea if a business is discriminating against somebody, what do we do? Right? In reality, put it on social media, right? Put it out there, let people know, and then hopefully you would get enough support and response that you would be able to do something like boycott, right? Because that is one of the primary sort of responses. Economics is always going to be a key, all right? So anytime where you can influence or hurt somebody economically, it's going to have an impact. All right? Additionally, litigation. All right? So litigation is filing lawsuits. Okay? Interest groups will use what are called amicus curiae briefs. All right? What that is where a... You got that on the test wrong? Probably.
You got it right.
Okay. Amicus curiae briefs are where a non-party to the lawsuit will actually file legal paperwork trying to influence the judge. Okay, so it's filing on behalf of some other issue that's already involved there. All right. So what you could do is you could have. We know we use a case that's current right now, right? We know that the state of Washington sued Donald Trump, right? Over the travel ban. Okay, that's the actual litigant. The actual litigant against Donald Trump and his travel ban is the state of Washington. And so that means that the state of Washington and the Department of Justice, which is Trump's sort of wing here, they're engaged in a legal battle in a courtroom. Okay, can the ACLU file paperwork and give it to the judges? That's what this is. Okay? it would be paperwork filed by some sort of third party or third entity that's going to try to provide additional information to the judges to help them make their decision. Yes, sir.
So like, if he lost, like, the lawsuit, like, what would happen?
Trump did lose.
Oh,
The Ninth Circuit Court made a decision last night, 3-0, to keep or maintain the stay on the travel ban, which means, well, it's not the only thing that they ruled in favor of Donald Trump for, is that it is something that the DOJ can appeal, that it is an appealable case, which means theoretically they could appeal it to the next level, which is the Supreme Court. I don't know that they will.
like, is that gonna affect his presidency though? If there's
Well, I mean,
like, so like,
you'd be hard pressed to say that it doesn't affect his presidency, because obviously, I mean, he's been in office for what,
21
2.5 weeks? 21 days, is that what you said?
It was like 21 days yesterday. Yeah, it was 22 days.
Right, so I think it was on a Friday.
Yeah, it's 21 days.
So it's 21 days today, so this is 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, he has signed something like 12 executive orders already. Okay? You don't know what an executive order is, and we haven't gotten to this yet, because we haven't gone over the actual branches of government yet. An executive order is essentially a law created solely by the president. That's not the way law is supposed to be created in this country. It's supposed to be created by the Congress. And so if you have a president that overutilizes executive orders, but more importantly, creates executive orders that are actually in violation of the Constitution, and that's what the Ninth Circuit Court said. The Ninth Circuit Court said that this executive order violates the Fifth Amendment and the Due Process Clause. Now here's where it gets tricky. Because Trump and the Department of Justice say that there is no due process violation. Because the Constitution of the United States of America only applies to people in America. We're talking about people in Somalia. Right? The Ninth Circuit Court disagreed and said that apparently the Constitution applies to everybody in the world. I guess. Okay? That seems to be a new interpretation to me. So it's difficult to determine what would happen. We'll ask the question, what happens next? Theoretically, the DOJ can appeal to the Supreme Court. That's really tricky, though, because right now the Supreme Court has 8 members, which means it would be 4-4, because they probably go along sort of partisan lines. Okay?
Well, then couldn't they, like, opt not to hear it?
What would happen if they opted not to hear it is that it would maintain the circuit court's decision. If they hear it and it goes 4-4, it maintains the circuit court's decision. Okay, so either way, Trump ends up losing. Probably the worst case scenario is a moderate, what we would consider sort of a moderate on the court, which is somebody like Kennedy or Roberts, who are Republicans on the court. They are appointed by Republicans, but they go and side with the Ginsburg wing of the Supreme Court every now and then. I can honestly see either one of those two men looking at Trump and basically being like, if you're going to insult all the justices and everybody in the judicial branch, yeah, just don't want to go away, and we're going to go ahead and side against you
So like,
for purely political purposes. And the Supreme Court is not supposed to be like that, but it happens sometimes. All right? What?
so is a state suing the president? That's not a common thing, is it?
Okay, so it's not common. All right? There have been instances in which the states have sued the national government before. The state of Maryland in McCulloch versus Maryland, who had that case in here? Right, so if we remember McCulloch versus Maryland, that's absolutely a case you need to know. The state of Maryland sued the national government over a bank that the national government had created in the state of Maryland because the state of Maryland wanted to tax the bank. Couldn't do that. Okay, the national government actually wins out. In fact, the national government, Trump and the Department of Justice, one of the things that they said is they actually claimed that the state of Washington didn't have a legal standing to sue. The court decided because certain members of apparently like Washington University were implicated in the travel ban, that they did have a standing to sue. Because I guess that makes them state employees. Okay, but it is a very uncommon situation that we're looking at right now. Okay, so it takes us a little off topic as to the amicus curiae briefs, but right, litigation is one of the ways that they're going to do that. Okay, so litigation is actually suing. Amicus curiae briefs are essentially filing paperwork or filing opinions about other cases that they're not directly involved in. All right, campaign contributions. Interest groups give tons of money to campaigns. All right, just tons of money. Okay, they endorse candidates, so they will actually come out and say that, hey, this guy's really good. Okay. Conversely, they will target unfriendly candidates or people that they don't like, especially in highly contested congressional districts, right? If they have a chance of causing this person to lose their job, they will target them. Okay? Sometimes they will do that, like with the example like Pete Olson. We know the only way Pete Olson loses his job. Do we actually understand that? Right, he will stop being a congressman if he quits, he retires. But the only way that, in all honesty, Pete Olson will ever lose his job is if he is challenged in a primary and another Republican wins the primary and then takes his job. Because he's not going to lose to a Democrat. All right? So you could target Pete Olson. If somebody doesn't like what Pete Olson is doing, they could target him and try to back some other candidate in a primary. Right? Issuing report cards, that's always fun because they're really sort of comical. The NRA loves giving out report cards, right? So if you go and if you listen to like Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton debating each other during the primary process, like Bernie Sanders, for as progressive as he is, has like a B+ rating from the NRA. Okay? And he has a B+ rating from the NRA because he's from Vermont and he doesn't want to take away guns from hunters in Vermont. Right? He's representing his constituents in the manner in which he should. But, right, that's report cards. Initiative, referendum, and recall. You need to know those three terms. Those three terms are slightly different. All right? So initiative is something that's put on the ballot by the people. A referendum is something that's put on the ballot by a state. Both of those would become laws. Recall is trying to remove somebody from office or overturn something. And so interest groups can help any of these happen because, well, really the extension of a referendum here. Initiatives and recalls are generally done at a sort of grassroots level. We know what I mean when I say grassroots? It means it starts from the bottom and works its way up, right? So grassroots is where the people sort of start something, right? CalExit is the perfect example of a grassroots movement. Okay? The government, who's governor of California? Jerry Brown? Jerry Brown is not trying to secede from the union, right? In reality, one of the guys behind all of it is some multi-billionaire from Silicon Valley, some tech dude, right? And he's actually giving up his own money and trying to like hire people that'll go around and get enough signatures and try and garner support for California leaving the United States. All right. Next is lobbying. Lobbying is trying to influence Congress. We'll go over that more later. Mass mailings. This obviously in the technological age of today is not as important as what it used to be. Okay. So when we look at the strength of interest groups then in terms of how they get things accomplished, right? The larger the interest group, the more likely they are to be able to accomplish their goals. More members equals more money equals more sort of opportunity or resource. And now again, there's always a sort of opposite to this or a negative to this. The more people that you have, the greater the diversity, the less like focus that you're actually going to get, right? So when you look at something like the AARP, the vast majority of people in the AARP might not care about the exact same issues, right? For some of them, Social Security might be most important. For others, Medicare might be most important. their focus would be a little bit less. All right. All right. We talked about reasons why people join already. Okay. But the reasons why people join can actually influence the strength as well, right? So when you have something like the AARP where you end up with a fair amount of free riders, people that are just getting on to, like Will Jenkins is going to, so he can get his little discount on his blue plate special at Denny's. I don't know if Denny's gives AARP
I go to
discounts or
Denny's
not.
all the time.
I wouldn't admit to that, but all right.
Why, Denny's is good. Oh my god, I have a Starters. Denny's is where it's at.
I can't even have a conversation with you about that.
Okay, the organizational structure matters as well. All right. So depending on how well they're organized, or even in terms of how they are organized, whether it's centralized or decentralized, they can affect group strength. And depending on, really depending on how well they're organized, it doesn't necessarily matter if it's centralized or decentralized. There would be instances in which either would be better off, right? That really goes into the sort of leadership aspect, right? So again, the better your leadership, the better off you are. You can see that in a wide variety of things. If you look at the NRA, there have been times where the NRA has been fairly prominent in the United States because of some of its leadership. People like Clint Eastwood, who are obviously celebrities and very well liked. Okay. So I want to go over lobbying here real quick. Okay. Lobbying is how interest groups accomplish the majority of their goals. Okay. Lobbyist, right? So that's the word right there, lobbyist. That is an actual profession. Okay. So that's a job. Right? For some of you, it might be like the greatest job in the world. Okay, because lobbyists generally get paid to live in Washington, D.C. They make like $200,000 a year. Okay, they get a company credit card. Okay, and what they do is, and the reason it's called lobbying is because they meet congressmen in the lobby of the Capitol building, right? And there they sit there and they try to inform the congressman and persuade the congressman and get the congressman to do what they want. One of the things that they can do, and it is 100% legal, right, is they can do what we call in like the high class world a working dinner, right, where a lobbyist will take a congressman out to like some just ridiculously expensive steakhouse, right, where you get like Kobe beef that's like $100 for a steak.
Or Denny's.
Right? Yeah, no, they don't go to Denny's. Guarantee that. Okay? Because I'm not joking when I say that one of these meals, right, once you add in like your scotch and everything else that they're doing, a single meal might be $2,500. Okay? Now, the lobbyist pays for his meal and the congressman's meal. And it's 100% legal. So long as they talk about business. Because then they can basically both write it off as a business expense. So what they'll do is they'll sit there and they'll just have themselves a good old time, because obviously they're long-standing friends because they've been doing this for a long time, because the congressman's been in office for 30 years. And if you're a good lobbyist, you've been at your job for a long time. Because why would you leave $200,000 a year and a free, like, platinum card? Okay? Where nobody cares what you put on it. Right? And so basically you just sit there and you have a good old time and you tell jokes and you laugh all through dinner until you get to like dessert, and then all of a sudden the lobbyist is like, hey, you know, to make this official, I gotta tell you that I really think that in terms of education we need to stop having all of these standardized tests, because standardized testing is really bad for children and it stimulates them and it burns them out, and so they don't do as well once they grow up. Okay, there's my little spiel, let's keep drinking. Right? And literally for like 2 minutes worth of work, you get to enjoy a $5,000 meal. Alright?
Who pays for it like that, actually?
The company. Right? So in that instance, and like teachers unions have lobbyists. Right? So like this is what's a little ridiculous about it, right? So I'm a teacher, alright? If you're unaware, I make nowhere near $200,000 a year. Not even close, okay? But there are teachers' unions. Now, Texas does not have a union, alright? But in other states that they do, teachers pay a small percentage of their salary into the union. The union collects a large amount of money. There are people that work directly for the union that are not teachers. In some instances, they've never been teachers. That union will then hire lobbyists and pay the lobbyists like $200,000 a year to go down there and try to tell congressmen what they need to do for teachers. I picked the wrong end of education, didn't I?
There's only 4 steps to become a lobbyist.
What?
There's only 4 steps to become a lobbyist.
It's not hard to become a lobbyist at all.
I know what I'm doing.
I mean, well, here's the thing. It is, I will say this, it is hard in terms of like competition and getting the job, right? But like meeting the actual requirements of being a lobbyist is really not hard. In fact, because it sort of got out of control, we began to like having to put restrictions on it or limitations on it. We began having to define it, right? So we require lobbyists to register. We require disclosure of lobbyists' employers, their finance, and what they're trying to influence litigation-wise. And we actually, in congressional records, we publish all of this information, right? Except here's the problem, okay? Lobbyists have to say that their principal purpose is to influence legislation. How many of you would figure out a different principal purpose? Most of you would, right? Which is why we have far more lobbyists than people that are actually registered with lobbyists, okay? Additionally, right, we disclose all this information, we publish all this information. You think anybody looks at it? No, nobody cares.
So is there any like lobbyists that take their job like insanely seriously?
They all do.
Like when they go to that like dinner and they're like sit down and they try to have like a full-on conversation about it.
Oh, they absolutely would. Especially like the first time that you're meeting with a senator or a representative. Absolutely. Well, what I'm saying is let's assume for the sake of argument that I'm a senator from Texas and I've been a senator for 10, let's say 20 years, right? And you're a lobbyist for the oil company, right? And you've been lobbying in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. Right? And so for 10 years, you and I have known each other and we've gone out to dinner regularly together and we're pretty much friends at that point, right? We probably once a month get together and go out and eat on your company's dime, and that's when you just give me the little 5-minute spiel, right? But the first time that you do that, absolutely. Okay, and here's the thing, if you realize at the end of that conversation that you're wasting your time and I'm not going to do what you want, you probably don't do that anymore, right? Because it would be a waste of your resources, right, or your company's resources.
They're not sticky with the bill.
Well, no, okay, but think about it, if you're an oil lobbyist and I'm a Texas senator, and I'm probably going to be doing what you want anyways because my constituents probably want what you want anyways. Because a lot of my constituents are in the oil business. And if I destroy the oil business, I destroy the people that are voting for me, which I'm not going to do. All right? So, yeah. Okay. So, lobbying only refers to Congress. Okay? Official lobbying. That doesn't mean that lobbying does not occur in terms of executive offices, agencies. Agencies is probably the right way of saying that. Okay? Especially the way that Congress and the government function now, and we haven't gotten to this, we will, but far more frequently than it should happen. We publish laws and we pass laws in the United States that are just unbelievably ambiguous. There's no real, explanation of what it's supposed to do. It's like, hey, healthcare for all, go. All right, well, how do you do that? Then what happens is that goes to an individual agency and they begin to fill in the little details of the law and how the law is actually going to function. And so you're going to have lobbyists, you're going to have people that are trying to influence how the agency makes those decisions. That actually does not count as lobbying. All right? All right, by 95, we're going to change that though. What?
Wait, so what happens if you're bad at the job and you can't convince anyone?
You lose your job.
They fire you.
Oh yeah, you get fired at that point. Right? I mean, if you can't do what your lobby needs you to do, right? What your company needs you to do, they're going to fire you and hire somebody else that can, right? Because I mean, how many of you in this room now are sitting there going, "Dude, that actually sounds like a pretty sweet job," right? And so that's like 8 of you in one room out of 30. Clearly, the lobbying industry is not at a shortage of people who want to make $200,000 a year, basically just trying to convince people to do what they want. It's a pretty sweet gig. All right. Now, why do we have lobbyists? All right, and I'm gonna. How much time do I have? I have 5 minutes. All right, I'm not gonna get to the other thing that I wanted. That's disappointing. The case for lobbyists, though, so you understand, there's actually some really positives for lobbyists, and the reason why lobbying is actually seen as a good thing. Okay, lobbyists are specialists. In fact, if we go back to my little example about a teachers union lobbyist, that teachers union lobbyist is going to go to senators and representatives with just binders full of information saying, look, here's what we are doing to our children that is terribly detrimental, right? Here are all the things that we do to kids that actually sort of makes their life worse and harder because of the way we run education, right? And so what we want you to do instead is A, B, and C, okay? And so they do provide information, absolutely, okay? They absolutely provide information to government, whether it's the executive agencies or Congress, okay? In fact, most lobbyists will tell you that their primary purpose, right, is not to influence legislation, but to educate legislators. All right? Okay? Lobbying provides a means of participation for the people. Okay? Again, so, take me as a teacher as an example. Am I able to go to Pete Olson and be like, hey, buddy, here's what I need you to do in terms of education? No, Pete Olson doesn't care about me. Okay? However, if I am a member of a teachers union and my union has lobbyists and the lobbyists go and talk to Pete Olson, they're going to be able to get accomplished ultimately what I need to get accomplished because I'm the one telling my union, hey, here are the things that are ridiculous in education. Okay? When I started teaching in California, my very first year as a teacher, I had an economics class that had 53 kids in it, in a room this size. Okay? There's like 30 of you in here. So imagine for a second adding another 23 children into this room. Right? Pretty crowded.
Oh, that sounds pretty great. I like it.
Okay? Is that an effective way for me to teach? God, no. Right? So, being a part of a teachers union, and California does have a teachers union, right? I can go to my union representative and be like, hey, this is a little ridiculous. Right? To where in California they actually have rules now that, I forget the number, I want to say I was only allowed to have 165 kids, 175 students maybe. Right? Like that's all I was allowed to have. If I had more than 175 students in the course of the day, they had to pay me extra for each extra kid. Okay? Well, here's the, no, maybe it was once. Maybe it was 165. I forget what it was, but I ended up having like one fewer class than every other teacher. Because I didn't have a class under 40 kids. Right?
Is that why you took all the government classes?
Why?
So you could get a bonus.
There's no bonus in Texas. There's no union. You don't get paid for this. Right? If somebody calls me, and North Carolina where I taught there, they were terrible at it. I used to get called almost every day on my little conference period, and they'd be like, hey, you need to go cover so-and-so's class. Right? In California, if you did that, they had to pay you for it. Right? Here, they just don't do it. Why did I leave California? Because the pay is not that much better than here, and the cost of living is like...
A lot more, yeah.
Yeah. Right? I mean, the crappy house I lived at in San Diego would have cost like $500,000. And literally, if you sat in my living room and you looked at the fireplace, you could see outside. Because because there's just a big hole in the back of it. Right, like the window in the kitchen, we had to nail it shut from the outside because it would just swing open. Yeah, it was pretty bad. All right, real quick, case against lobbyists. They're going to over-represent the rich and the powerful. All right, and what they're going to do is cause political polarization and actually end up hurting because they're going to do things that are detrimental. Y'all packed up. Just pack up and go. Have a good day. I will take the